turn in their lesson plans into a Google folder on Fridays. But in addition to that, they get feedback from one of us administrators every single week. So for example, I do all of the literacy plans. That would be all of our literacy teacher and our special education teachers. Mr. Tooney does all the math ones. Ms. Kennedy does science, Whitaker does social studies, and they split the exploratories. One of the things I told them is, if I'm going to go through all the work to make you do the plans and turn them in, you're going to always get feedback on them. Things that I'm looking for when I'm looking in lesson plans is, one of the biggest things that I'm looking for is the success criteria. And something we're going to be working on in our PD is that the success criteria has a high amount of rigor. So as I was doing walkthroughs the other day and I saw some success criteria posted, one of the success criteria for students was, I can read the book. No, that's not even a 1, it's a 0 rigor. We want it to be more rigorous for our kids. I can read the first chapter and verbalize what the theme is of that chapter. So when I give feedback to my teachers, I'm asking them questions like, so for one of my teams yesterday when I did their feedback, I said, all 4 of your I can statements for students this week are written at a very low rigor. Would you please rewrite these and up the rigor?
What do you mean specifically when you say rigor?
So for example, when I said like the I can statements for kids, because we wanted to be in student-friendly language, I can read the book. As far as the depth of knowledge, that's very low. That's very, very low. It used to be Bloom's taxonomy. Now it's depth of knowledge. And the Iowa Core, on every single standard, it gives you the depth of knowledge right there for you. So it's not something that teachers have to make up. But what teachers are having a hard time with is coming up with those questions to ask students that are a higher rigor, a higher depth of knowledge, where they have to synthesize or where they have to critique instead of just regurgitating information that they've read. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about the rigor. And so saying in those I can statements, instead of I can read the book, I can read the first 30 pages and accurately describe the protagonist in the book. That's a higher rigor than just I can read the book. Does that make sense? So each week they turn in lesson plans, they get feedback on them. One of the requirements that we have is that they answer. We try not to ask more than one reflective question unless the lesson plans are just really confusing, or I got some this week that was only Monday through Wednesday and it should be Monday through Friday. So I asked, first of all, where's Thursday and Friday's lesson plans? And it's just that accountability piece. You can't teach the kids well if you are not planned well. And I know some teachers will say, well, I have it in my head, I know exactly what I'm doing. For anything, when I'm doing PD with my staff, I have my own lesson plan. Everybody has to plan. And so that's something that's really hard for some teachers to get in the routine of doing that, because it is something new. They did it for a little bit last year, but this year it's a requirement by 3 o'clock that they have their lesson plans in, and then they'll get feedback over the weekend.
3 o'clock on Friday? So they give lessons plans for every day of the week? Okay.
Yep, for that next week, you have to have them into us by 3 o'clock on Friday. And then one of my goals is before I leave on Friday to give them that feedback. Because if there's something that I want them to change, I want them to know before Monday morning, before they open it. Yeah, good question.
What sort of change have you experienced since implementing this with teachers?
Say that again, I just couldn't hear.
What sort of experience or outcomes have you observed since implementing this?
Given that it's only been 3 weeks, I won't say that I've seen huge outcomes. The biggest outcome I've seen is when we're in PLCs, because part of the lesson plan requirement is that every day you collect data. Now that could be lots of things. It could be an exit ticket, it could be observational notes where you're just walking around and taking observational notes. It could be a formal assessment, it could be a common formative assessment. So there's a lot of ways to collect data. So now that I can see that they're doing that, that allows me to ask them specific questions in our PLCs. I noticed that on Wednesday you gave them an exit ticket on citing evidence. Let's see the data on how your kids did with that. So it helps with that conversation to see exactly how students are doing on the standards. Instead of saying, well, I think about half of my kids are this way. They have a grading system. They can say 73% of our kids got standard 7.1 with just citing textual evidence. That's a lot more powerful of a conversation. Good question.
So you mentioned that conversation. So it seems like that's almost like an implicit purpose of turning in the lesson plans. So it's not that you're just
Just for something.
did you get it right or wrong? No, you really want to converse with them about their
Yes.
instructional thinking.
And when we are doing walkthroughs, I want to see that your lesson plans are matching what your teaching is in the classroom. I mean, if I know on Wednesday you're doing partner work where they have to look at example narrative and they have to edit that narrative, when I come in on Wednesday, that's what I should see. Now, if I don't, I may ask a question about, well, your lesson plan said this, and a teacher may say, you know what, but on Tuesday we did this, and they just didn't get it, so I needed to do some reteaching on Wednesday. That's totally fine. That's the point of asking the question. They need to know that I know what's going on, and more importantly, they need to know what's going on in their classroom.
So, kind of connecting to Mitch's question, where you've had an opportunity to implement this on a longer-term basis back at Lincoln, what was like the progression that you saw over a longer period of time?
The progressions that we saw, I had where teachers could graduate from turning in their lesson plans every week. And how they did that was, if what I saw between your lesson plans and PLCs, when I did walkthroughs, and most importantly, your student achievement data, all four aligned, you didn't have to officially turn your lesson plans in for feedback. Now, of course, you still had to plan. They just weren't turned in or collected every week for feedback. I had several teachers in several grade levels that had done that and graduated, and I still had, when I left, I still had about 10 teachers who I was still having turn lesson plans into me because of things weren't mentioned up. Their kids weren't achieving, what I was seeing in the classroom wasn't solid, and I was still needing to give them feedback on their lesson plans. And I will tell you, I feel like that was a huge point to our kids achieving, because even those teachers who had graduated, I could say, hey, how did your kids do on that last DRA2? And they could say, well, I had 8 kids that were out of 40, I had 7. They knew their data, they knew exactly where their kids were at. And that's what's important.
So what was the nature of the conversation of those who didn't graduate?
Well, I am brutally honest. I'm working on that, but that's just who I am. And so it was an honest conversation to say, because I had somebody say, why do I have to still turn in lesson plans? Well, here's why. When I'm in your classroom, I'm not seeing solid teaching. When I look at your data, and it might be, I have a whole kindergarten team, and out of 4 teachers, only 1 has to give me their plans. Because I'm seeing solid student achievement data from that other teacher, I'm seeing solid teaching, and I'm not seeing it from 1. So I would say, until I can see that from you, you still have to give me your plans. I had one teacher who I had to have a coach sit and plan with him every single week because his plans were weak, his students were actually going backwards, they weren't increasing, and the teaching that I saw was less than stellar. I ended up putting that teacher on a plan of assistance. That teacher no longer works in our district, but that's my job, is to support our kids, and to support our kids, I have to lift up our teachers, and if they can't be lifted up to where they're great teachers, then they have to go away.
So what does student achievement data look like, given the kind of collection that you're, prescribing for them?
It looks different depending on the day, depending on the subject area, depending on everything. The biggest student achievement data that we are, of course, judged on is our once-a-year Iowa assessment. But we need to know all along how our kids are going to do. So the teachers need to be doing assessments all the time. That's what good teaching is. So every day, whether you know it or not, teachers are doing assessments. It could be as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down if you get this. It could be as simple as an exit ticket, just asking a question. It could be looking at an assignment, and you're going to use this as an assessment to see if your kids really got the process of double-digit multiplication. So the data looks totally different depending on the classroom, the period, their special ed, ELL, what the standards are you're working on. It could be totally different. But that's also why we have our professional learning communities, our PLCs, and that's why we talk about those things during there. Okay, your students, we talk about them based on standards, not just based on what you think. So you can say 67% of my students get this citing evidence, so I still have a third that don't. So what are you doing for that third to get them there? How are you backfilling to get them where they need to be?
Okay. Describe the PLCs. How do they work in relationship to these lesson plans that are being turned in?
Our professional learning communities, every Tuesday are our literacy ones. And you're welcome. I can give you a schedule
okay,
if
that'd be
anybody
great.
wants to come and just watch. I've had people watch in the past. Mondays, we actually have our social studies PLC. Tuesdays are English language arts. And Thursday are our math PLCs. And basically what we do is we sit, not only do we talk about data, but more importantly, we talk about how we're going to respond to that and what the instruction will look like. So our literacy coach is available, and she's in all of our social studies and our literacy PLCs, so she can help. So today in social studies, they were talking about a topic, and she said, oh, have you ever heard of the book? I can't remember the book's name. And they said, no. And she said, it's great to teach about the perspective, what you guys are doing. And so she's a huge resource for that. I also, PLCs are my priority because that's where I can see what students are learning and what teachers are teaching. So I attend every single PLC. We have our special ed instructional strategist PLC on Fridays. So that does take a lot of my time throughout the week. But it's one of the things I did at Lincoln, and it's one of those hills that I'm willing to die on because I know that's where the instructional and the planning and where I can give input on what to do, whether it be planning, whether it be management, any of those things. The PLCs are hugely important, hugely.
What time do they take place on Tuesday?
There are 3 different times.
Oh, wow.
So the first one on Tuesday is at like 8:47, or I can't remember the exact time. But I'll have to look because there's 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade.
Oh, okay, for each grade.
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
yep.
all
They're
right.
They're by grade level.
Okay.
So all the literacy teachers from 8th grade meet at one time, 7th grade and 6th grade, because we have
Okay.
multiple teachers.
Yeah, yeah, understand. Okay. Any other questions?
Is that schedule something you can email to him to share
Yep.
with us?
Yep. And they're always in the office in our big conference room, so there's plenty of seats if anybody wants to come and sit and watch.
Okay. So where do you notice like the biggest progress that teachers make through this process that you have them engage in?
So, honestly, actually just turning the lesson plans in.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I know it's something that administrators in this building have tried in the past, and teachers just wouldn't do it. They just wouldn't turn in lesson plans. Well, that's not an option this year. I mean, if you work here, here's part of the expectations is you turn in lesson plans on Friday. And we have not had any issues with people not turning in plans, which I think says a lot to our climate and culture here, and that expectations are for everybody, not just for kids, they're for adults as well. Here's what the expectation is, and people are meeting it. If people need to turn them in, let's say at 5 o'clock or on Saturday, because we have staff gone, and sometimes as teachers, you don't get planning time because you have to sub. And so I had a teacher say, hey, I subbed 3 times this week, can I turn my plans in Sunday? Well, of course, that's totally fine. But I'm noticing that teachers are doing planning, and they're doing collaborative planning, which is always our goal. And so I notice, like, if I go down to the pod during 6th grade lunch, they're all sitting in one classroom eating lunch, but they're also planning. And they're planning together during that time. And there's a huge strength and huge benefit in that. So if I'm a 6th grade student, no matter which literacy class I'm in, I'm getting the same teaching strategies. So one isn't better than the other, one isn't different from the other. They do differ if they have kids that are struggling, but they even talk about teaching strategies among themselves. They're willing to switch kids if needed to be to support students, and that's huge.
So, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The lesson plans that they turn in, are they all one format? Because I've seen in a lot of my classes, they're all different formats that are expected.
So I'm lucky enough, we cannot require them to have a certain template. We can require the elements. However, I gave them the elements, and all my literacy teachers got together and did one format. So I'm lucky I did the literacy ones because they have the same format, which I like because in that format, they actually have the special ed teachers fill their part in that same lesson plan. The ELL teacher fills it in that same. So I look at one 6th grade lesson plan, and it has the gen ed teachers, the special ed teachers, the ELL, all on there, so I can give them all feedback at once. But that's not what everybody else is doing. So there's different formats. We can require the elements, but not the template.
So this is the Google Doc where you put in the comments and everybody gets it all at the same time. Okay.
Would you be able to email us like an example of one?
Oh yeah, that's a good. Yep, I'll give you that too.
Okay, great.
That's a good one. Yep. And I really like having that differentiation in there, and what the special ed teachers are going to do and what the ELL teachers are going to do, because that helps me be able to visualize. So in a co-teaching setting, I want to know what's going to be different because if a student is in there in a co-taught setting, how is that going to benefit them versus if they were in a different classroom? And so that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at those 2 things. Yeah.
So if Abby and I have a different teaching style, do you require both of us to have the same lesson, or would you let us have like a little bit different spin on the same content?
You would have the same lesson plan, but how you deliver it could be totally different. So you're delivering the same concepts, you're doing the same things, but I could walk into each of your rooms and it looked totally different. Does that make sense? But they stay with the same standard, they do the same activities with kids, those types of things. But, so I walked into 8th grade math, it looked totally different, but they were doing the exact same thing.
So, just give us an example. You mentioned to me on Friday that in terms of the relationship with the kids, there's this teacher who really gets it. And he's like your model for that particular process.
Yep.
So what, for example, does his lessons look like compared to somebody else who may, as you say, may be teaching the same things, but in terms of the relationship with the kids, just is at a very different place?
Perfect question. So, because last week I was in his classroom and the other teacher's classroom, and since I don't know math well, I can't tell you I don't know if they were doing area or perimeter or what, but one teacher was teaching it the right way, out of the book, talking about, so if we're in, whatever the book said, if we have 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, but the teacher with the relationship said, okay, think about your backyard. You want to put a pool in your backyard. Now, what if your backyard is long? How long, so he put it in kid-friendly language instead of the book language, just because he gets it. He knows our kids, he gets our kids, he knows that you just got to talk differently. They get the concept, but instead of just looking at the book and looking at some squares, he made it relative to their life. Okay, pretend you're putting a pool in your backyard. Well, that's something 6th graders are like, yeah, I want to do that, that type of thing. So
Okay,
that's what I
all right,
noticed in his
yeah,
classroom
all right, good.
a lot. And honestly, the teachers with the best relationships with kids have the best management, the best classroom management. If you go into classrooms and they're not managed very well, 99.9% of the time, it'll come back to the teacher relationship with the kids, plain and simple. I can tell you right now what classrooms I'm going to walk into, and they may be wild, and I can tell you what classrooms I'm going to walk into, and they're never going to be wild. And it all comes to the relationship. And that's huge. I know that's why I gave them that 7 days, and I can't stress that enough. Because the teachers that are struggling with the management, it's because they're struggling with the relationship with the kids. They're really struggling with the relationship with the kids. And if the kids don't think you like them, they'll make you like them. That's kids. It's not just our kids.
Yeah,
that's
that's
just
right.
kids. That is, I don't
It'll be
care
your
where
own.
you're at. So if you're going to go to a small town, they're not going to do the same thing. They will. That's kids.
So do you have any advice for classroom management skills, or besides like the relationship, like how to build those relationships? I've heard like the first week of classes, don't worry about content, more so focus on the kids and get to know them. Is that something?
That's what I told them, that first 7 days. So we started on Thursday. I gave them that Thursday, Friday, and then the whole 5 days the next week. And I can tell you very few teachers in this building took all that. The content was started pretty much on Monday in most classrooms.
Really? Wow.
In most classrooms, they started content on Monday. And you can tell that. I mean, I can tell in some of the rooms that I walk in. It's the relationships and it's consistency. If your rules are, when I'm talking, you stay in your seats, then you have to hold them to that. Say, oh, remember we agreed that when I'm talking, you stay in your seats. But if you ignore that behavior, pretty soon it's not 1 kid, then it's 2 kids, then it's 3 kids, and now all your kids are out of their seat and you can't figure out why. Because you haven't addressed that. You've got to be consistent with kids. Kids want structure. They may pretend they don't, but they do. They do. Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of the small things that you have observed going into these classrooms where the teachers have strong relationships with their students? Like just like the small things that they do, the small nuance, cool things.
The biggest thing I think I would notice is that they actually talk to their kids. So I walked in and somebody's playing like leisure basketball or football or something, and I heard a teacher say, hey, did you guys win your game yesterday? Just little things like that. Just knowing your kids, knowing, oh, I have these kids that play the YSF football and they have games on Sunday, so I'm just going to ask them, hey, how was your game yesterday? That makes kids feel important. Like, man, he remembers that he has 150 kids, but he remembers that I had a game yesterday and he asked me how my game was. I noticed those teachers use humor with their kids. And you have to be careful because there's a line between humor and sarcasm. So you have to really be careful with kids. But if you have that relationship, you can be sarcastic with kids and they get it because they know that the relationship that they have with you. So it's just people. I've noticed adults and teachers who stand maybe doing a duty in the morning. So if I'm assigned to do the cafeteria in the morning, And I noticed some staff that just, they stand. They don't talk to the kids, they just stand and watch and wait for something to happen. When I do my lunch duty, there's no way I can just stand there. I'm talking to kids, I'm sitting down, that's what you do. That's what you interact with kids, and that's why you have that relationship. So then when I see you in the hallway, not in class, I can say, and like, I know, I'm going, because we have that relationship. It will help you every time when dealing with behavior things. When a kid knows you and you know them, it always helps.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the insights.
Thank you.